Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of A Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is.
And the red light is rolling. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Half a Dozen Things. You'll notice again that I'm flying solo. This is, I think, the third one in a little series that we've put together for Half a Dozen Things, and my name's Mike Vickers. I'm normally a part of the Fleet Geeks up there. I'm normally a part of the Fleet. I'm one of the geeks that appears on the Fleet Geek podcast. So go and check those podcasts out for those of you who are not familiar with that particular brand of podcast. As I say, I've done a couple of these already in this series. We looked at how fleets can prepare for a greener future. I think no matter what our political allegiances or views may be on the green agenda, I think it's anybody in the fleet transport sector will know that that is going to be a feature of us going forward as an industry and how best be prepared for it. I've also done a podcast on vulnerable road users, which I think as we all understand our responsibilities as operators of heavy goods vehicles and where they fit in with a relationship with other road users, and we sometimes come into conflict with those other road users. So this is kind of following on from that one, really. And what I was going to look at is, I thought about the title for this podcast and how to present it. And what I don't want to do is present to you a sort of step-by-step guide to accident investigation. This is not particularly about how to investigate accidents. I just want to share with you 6 sort of top tips or top features of an accident investigation, things that you should or shouldn't do, rather than take you through the steps of accident investigation. We should all investigate accidents as transport operators. Not only should we investigate accidents, but we should investigate near misses, because today's near miss is tomorrow's fatal road traffic collision. Heavy goods vehicles are big, by the very nature of the word, isn't it? Big, heavy things. They've got a lot of kinetic energy. Speed is not normally a factor in heavy goods vehicle accidents because of the weight as well. So, at what would appear to be a fairly sort of low speed near miss with a heavy goods vehicle is only a fraction, only that far away from becoming a fatal collision with maybe a pedestrian or a cyclist. So, think about the opportunity that near misses give us. The near misses give us the opportunity to investigate the causation of those accidents or those near misses to prevent them becoming accidents in the future. So that's one thing to get out of the way. This is not a guide on how to investigate accidents. That is, of course, something we would be delighted to. Well, not delighted, because it means there's been an accident. That's something we could definitely help you with as fleet people, professionals moving forward. We've got an accident investigation course especially designed for transport managers. So this is not a step-by-step guide in how to investigate accidents, but it's just some hints and tips on how to avoid some of the pitfalls of accident investigation. Now, I must have mentioned the word accident at least 20 times, if not more, already in this 3.5 minutes that I've been going. And you might be thinking, well, wait, Mike, you're a bit behind times here, pal. We don't talk about accidents anymore, do we? But we talk about collisions and we talk about the police themselves will not call them road traffic accidents. They're not called RTAs, they're called RTCs. Insurance companies will call them incidents. Accident, why is it gone out of fashion? I don't know why the word accident has gone out of fashion. I guess I've heard various people, somebody said to me the other day, we don't use the word accident because that implies that there's nobody to blame. Well, does it really? What an accident merely means an unplanned or unforeseen event. And I don't think we ever plan to have collisions or incidents, do we? It is an accident. And the reason why I'm sticking by my guns on this one as well is because that there is no definition in law, or certainly road transport law, there is no definition of an incident or a collision. The law only gives us a description of an accident, and that's the Road Traffic Act 1988, which describes to us the conditions that have existed for us to have been in an accident. Damage to property on or adjacent to the highway, injury to another person other than the driver, damage to another vehicle, and damage or injury to an animal not carried. So, and if anybody's ever been on the Transport Manager course or done an OLAT or a refresher, you'll know that there's 8 animals essentially that are 8 types of animal that are protected by the Road Traffic Act in particular. So that's that there is a definition of an accident in accordance with the Road Traffic Act. There is not a definition of a collision that we can look at. So that's why we still use the word accident. Anyway, so I digress. Onwards and upwards then, and I'm going to look at just giving you these 6 just key areas. So this is not a guide to accident investigation. This is just 6 key areas that I think that you should be considering when you're carrying out your own accident investigations. Just before we do that, though, bear in mind that I'm going to be mentioning this all the way through here. Blame and cause are 2 different things. Traditionally, we've always looked at accident investigation through the prism of apportioning blame, and that is because we're largely dealing with either a criminal investigation or an investigation by the law enforcers, the police, Crown Prosecution Service, and of course by insurance companies. So an insurance company is going to be wanting to look at who is going to be financially liable for this accident? Who are we going to be able to call financially liable? Word of warning, insurance companies, they are very, with an insurance company, it is only, I'm sure people with insurance companies are very kind and very human and very, don't want people to have accidents. Of course they don't. But they do look at it as data, and it is purely and simply to them, it is data, it's calculated risk, and it's risk factors and data and money they pay out. It's just numbers on a spreadsheet. And quite often, insurance companies will be very pragmatic in the way they approach liability. So an insurance company, for example, may accept liability, but that doesn't necessarily mean your driver is to blame and vice versa. Sometimes that is the most pragmatic approach to take. Otherwise, you're going to be embroiled in court cases and claims and counterclaims and the like. So don't just take it that the insurance company have come to the conclusion that your driver is liable, therefore, or they are liable even. So therefore, your driver is to blame, and of course, vice versa. And the same with police. The police are interested in one thing and one thing only, and that is, has an offence been committed? Has an offence been committed, and what is the likelihood of that offence there being enough evidence to substantiate a conviction? So you might have, if you've watched enough of these programs, you'll know that they at various stages of an investigation they will put tests in place to see if the evidence stacks up to going forward to the next step, which is a charge for a potential looking for a conviction. So they can be slightly different when we are looking as operators as a way of preventing a reoccurrence. So blame and cause are 2 completely different things. So number 1 then is time or timeliness, and I guess actually I'm going to be slightly counter to what I've just said there in terms of the reasons why we're doing this. Time taken to get your accident report from your driver and forwarded to your insurance companies. That makes a huge difference to the claims process. So the quicker that we can get those claims in, or those reports in, those accident reports in, the quicker that our insurance companies can be dealing with these things. Now, if your driver, let's say, for example, has run into the back of Mrs. Miggins in a mini metro, at a set of traffic lights or whatever. If we don't deal with that quickly, that report is given to our insurance companies quickly so that they can deal with the claim. Before you know where you are, Mrs. Miggins has contacted an accident claims line, and she's now driving around in a brand new Mercedes as a hire car at £300 a day. Her vehicle is being recovered and taken into Mulliner Park Ward, if they still exist, in fact, the Rolls-Royce coach builders, to have a mini metro repaired. And the costs are just going to spiral out of all proportion. So normally your insurance company will have a way of dealing with that. They'll have an accident management system in place whereby that they can recover Mrs. Miggins's car. They can get it to one of their approved body shops, that they've got a predetermined level of labour and parts they pay for, and they'll get her in a hire car that's supplied at a sensible rate. So that can really keep the costs down for them, and of course the future costs for you. So you can't afford to hang about. If there's been an accident or an incident, get the report to your insurance company ASAP, but also on top of that, in a timely manner for yourself, to start the investigation, because events are fresh in people's minds. The longer you leave it, we build together something called a confirmation bias. So the longer we leave it to get a report from the driver or to interview the driver, the more that incident will change in their perception, because they're now building a scenario to fit an outcome rather than what actually happened. So the faster we can get that in place, the better. Number two, then. So number two, again, I say this is not how to investigate an accident. This is just things to remember. Evidence, gathering evidence. Your primary piece of evidence will be from the driver and from the driver's account of what happened. That's going to be important, but I'll come on to that in a bit about how to approach that conversation, because I think we need to be very, very careful with how we have that conversation with the drivers. To get what we're after here is not skirting around issues. We're after the truth. But let me come on to that in a minute. So the evidence then from the accident. So primary, it's going to be the driver's statement. Secondary to that, we can corroborate that evidence with evidence from things like the tracking software, if we've got it. And of course, the elephant in the room that I'm going to mention now, camera footage. So evidence from the dash cams, if you've got them fitted, or evidence from the lots and lots of fleets now have got 360 cameras, and even in the internal camera in the cab, as it were. So bear in mind, what I would always recommend in terms of, and you've seen this yourself, if you're scrolling through Facebook or Twitter or something, and somebody's posted I'm not talking just about road traffic collision, but all sorts of things like fights in the street and stuff like that.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're proud to sponsor a Half Dozen Things podcast. Flagship Partners help their clients become safer, greener, and greater through a range of consultancy and training services. We offer audits through to risk assessments, contracts through to support with managing your culture, all the way from mandatory training through to management training as well. So if you need any support, please do get in touch with Flagship Partners today.
If you're looking and what you're seeing is a snapshot, you're not seeing it in the wider context. So don't get drawn into viewing camera footage in the same way. It's no good just watching the actual incident. You've got to watch before it. Get an understanding if there was any, sort of anything that could give you some clues as to why that accident happened before the actual accident itself. So it may be that let's go back to the Mrs. Miggins situation. It may be that your vehicle had been following Mrs. Miggins for a number of miles and a number of minutes. Was there anything in there that would lead you to believe that Mrs. Miggins' driving may not have been up to the standard of that expected of a normal, safe and competent driver? Was there something there, a clue there as to, or maybe a clue in your own driver's driving style, demeanour. Were they leaving their braking way too late? Have to go back half an hour and watch them in the traffic queue there. Were they leaving their braking a wee bit too late? So don't just look at it in that clip, look at it in a wider context. But clearly camera footage does give you, what can't speak, can't lie. It does give you some fantastic, it boggles my mind to think where we would be without these sort of camera things these days. An awful lot of drivers, they may feel uncomfortable with cameras everywhere, particularly ones in the cab, but I can guarantee you I've seen it work in the driver's favour many, many more times than I've seen it work against the driver. So gather your evidence clearly. Some other evidence that you need to look at from that is encourage your drivers. Going back onto the camera thing, encourage your drivers. Now we discourage them, don't we, from mobile phones? Of course we do, but inevitably they will have them. And they don't leave them in locker. No matter what you might think of, you might have the best sort of mobile phone policy in the world, whereby your drivers have to leave their phones in lockers and things. It does, they're going to have a phone on them, and this is where you want them to get their phone out. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, there is no expectation of privacy in a public place. So you can take photographs of who you like, when you like, as long as it's in a public place. You don't have to have people's permission. So get pictures, many pictures of the accident scene as you possibly can. The position of the vehicles, the weather conditions, the road conditions, and of the people. Now, you've got to be a little bit careful. Whereas it's perfectly legal, but you have got to be a little bit careful when it comes to taking pictures. You won't want to be taking pictures of badly injured people. That would be distasteful and not altogether unpleasant, wouldn't it? Or children, for obvious reasons. But, Mrs. Miggins, what you don't want is Mrs. Miggins to put a claim in for 4 other people's whiplash injuries, when clearly Mrs. Miggins was the only person in the car. So if you take a picture of the inhabitants, that is absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. But more importantly, you want to take pictures of Mrs. Miggins's car and her damage, or the damage on her car, and of the road conditions, and anything else that may come into it. So all that evidence stitched together then will hopefully form a part of your investigation. So we can now move forward into the kind of investigation phase. And another key feature of that would be to do it with an open mind. It is amazing, isn't it, that if you think back, you've done this yourselves, and you're travelling partners, if you're driving with the other half, you've all done it. You've come across a road traffic collision, not literally witnessed it, but you've come across a road traffic collision somewhere on the road network, and immediately, within seconds, never mind going to policing college and learning how to become a collision investigator or anything like that, but immediately within seconds, you've made your mind up what's happened. Straight away, you've made your mind up. Oh, look at that car. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at Mrs. Miggins's Metro. And look at that position of that lorry. Oh, you can see what's happened there. He's been driving too close. She's had to pull up at those pedestrian crossings, and that lorry's gone straight there because he was following too close, too fast. Immediately, your mind is made up, isn't it? And then what happens is that confirmation bias kicks in, and you start then building a picture according to what you believe happened rather than what actually happened. So number 3 then is approach it with a very open mind. You don't know what happened, and you need to get to the bottom of it by looking at the facts, looking at the evidence, not by trying to fit your belief to trying to fit the evidence to your beliefs. So it will then come to a point where maybe this ties in a little bit more with number 2. Maybe you wouldn't leave it to number 4, but number 4, the top tip though for me would be approach the interview with the driver with a bit of empathy, and be careful of your choice of language. Remember, you're not looking for blame. You're looking for cause or causation. There will never be a single cause of a road traffic collision. A road traffic collision comes at the end of a chain of events that lead up to it. The cause of the damage to Mrs. Miggins's Metro is obvious. and that is that your 44-ton truck is planted in its boot. So that's the direct cause of the accident and the damage to Mrs. Miggins's car, and hopefully not the damage to Mrs. Miggins, but if she were to be damaged, that would have been as a direct result of this coming together of two pieces, two objects. So there will be more than one indirect cause for that. There'll be several causation factors. So we have to be careful with the language that we're using with the driver or drivers, because we're trying to encourage them to be honest, not, what you don't want them doing is thinking, right, how am I going to word this so that I don't get the blame? We want them to be honest. I was a bit tired. I'll tell you what, these glasses, I've had them for a little while now, but I think I need to go and get my eyes tested, or even if they came to you and said, look, I'll tell you what, I was turning my radio over at the time, and it's not, they're not going to, they're going to, you might be sat there thinking, who on earth's going to admit to that, but what we're trying to foster out of them is this open and this honesty, and this, I've done a lot of work on accident investigations. Well, I haven't done a lot of work on it. I've done a lot of reading on accident investigations in the airline industry, in aviation, and they have a no blame culture, because what they're trying to do is prevent an accident happening again, and that is difficult. It's a trick, but you really have got to use the right language in order to get the truth out of a driver, not by torturing them with thumb screws, because that's apparently not allowed anymore. But trying to foster that sort of, look, how do we stop this happening again? In fact, you could ask that as an open question, couldn't you? Because you may get answers in there, and they may feel more open to talk if you've asked them that as an open question. Look, drive, how do you think we can prevent this sort of thing happening again? What is it that we could do? Is there anything, what would have stopped that accident happening this morning? And then you'd be surprised. You might get them to open up a little bit in terms of, I've had a bit of a rough, we've got a newborn baby and I'm not getting a great deal of sleep, or, I've been going through a rough time recently in my private life, or, whatever it might be. You might start hearing then some of the underlying causes for that particular coming together. So number 5, I've sort of done this theme already, but let's get it in there as a sort of step number 5, or idea number 5 is to say, look for the cause, not for the blame. You're not trying to apportion blame. That's probably not your job in terms of, the insurance. This may have already gone up to the insurers, etc. They're going to be looking not for blame, but for liability. Who's financially liable? It may be a police investigation. What you're looking for as a transport manager is to prevent it happening again. It's happened. Nothing can undo that. It's happened. It's history. But what you don't want is to get that phone call again. The following week. Oh, hello, boss. Guess what? I've just run into the back of Mrs. Miggins again. That's what you're trying to prevent. So, again, I said this wasn't going to be an instruction manual for accident investigation, but what you've got to, you may be aware of the famous one they sort of bring out on lots of courses. It does work very well. And that's James Reason. A guy called James Reason came up with this Swiss cheese model for accident investigation. And that's, if you can imagine a Swiss cheese, with a cheese with all the holes in it, and you've sliced it up, those holes don't line up. That's great. That is not an accident happening. When all those holes line up, that's when an accident happening. So the slices are unsafe acts or conditions. So, the weather conditions, it being a bit wet and slippery, the tyres on the vehicle were not quite, they're a little bit getting them towards their wear limits. The brakes, they've been tested the last couple of times, but they're starting to deteriorate in terms of their ability to stop the vehicle. The driver's had a poor night, a rough night. The driver was just tuning into Radio 2 and Pop Masters at that particular time. So all of those things are the dangerous conditions or dangerous. If all of those line up, you've got a perfect storm then for an accident. If you can prevent one of those lining up by making an intervention somewhere along the line, then we potentially have prevented that accident from happening. So look for cause and not blame. Number 6, Number 6 is a kind of conclusion, and coming to a conclusion, or trying to think of not, again, causations, not blames. How do we prevent this from happening? You may have read or heard a lot of people use a system or a method called the 5 whys. Come up with 5 reasons why that accident happened. And that's important. It doesn't fit in with this podcast because this is half a dozen things, and 5 whys. If it was 6 whys, I would have gone with it. But 5 whys, why did the driver not see Mrs. Miggins stop in time? Why was Mrs. Miggins driving erratically? That could have been in there, couldn't it? Or why was she, Mrs. Miggins' brake light's not working? There you go. That's an interesting one. So Mrs. Miggins' brake light's not working. Is Mrs. Miggins to blame for the accident? It's a causational factor. That certainly doesn't mean to say Mrs. Miggins was blamed for the accident. Your driver still ran to the back of her. Of course they should have been working, but they weren't. So it's just one of those Swiss cheeses. If everything else falls into play, but Mrs. Miggins' brake lights weren't working, that opens that Swiss cheese up, and the accident occurs. So think of the 5 whys. So Mrs. Miggins' brake lights weren't working. Mrs. Miggins was driving erratically. Your driver hadn't had a decent night's sleep, and the tyres were like racing slicks. So that you build up your 5 whys. That's important. But I would add another one to that, and I would say another step to that, and I would say 5 why nots. What could have been done? 5 reasons why that wouldn't have happened or shouldn't have happened, rather than why it did happen. So there we are. So that's the 6 steps to I'll emphasize, it's not an instruction manual for, we can help with that if you want. It's not an instruction manual for accident investigation. It's just 6 key little things to remember. Timeliness of your reports, or timeliness of getting the statements, gather the right evidence and look at that evidence in the right context. Come to the investigation with an open mind. Don't try to fit in your what you believe happened. You believe it happened, so therefore let's fit the evidence around that. Empathy and language when dealing with the driver, when interviewing the driver, well, not just the driver, with anybody involved in it. Have a little bit of empathy and understanding. Use the right language. Turn away from language like blame. Leads on. Number 5, look for the cause, not the blame. And then number 6, conclude your accident investigations with something positive. So you want to take something positive out of your accident investigations, and the 5 whys or the 5 why nots is a good place to start for that. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you found that useful. I certainly enjoyed going through that. It is a little bit of a hobby. That seems a terrible thing to suggest that it might be a hobby, investigating accidents, but it's a lifelong passion that I've had for in aircraft and airline. And the airlines industry has got an incredibly safe record. And we can only be envious of the way that they investigate accidents. So if you ever do want to follow up on accident investigation, you want to get some good tips for accident investigation, there isn't anything out there for really, there's not a great deal out there in the great World Wide Web. But if you look for accident investigations in terms of the airline industry, there are literally hours and hours and hours and hours of stuff. So, and that's certainly where I took my inspiration from for this little bit. So thank you very much. And it's been smashing being with you, and we'll see you on the next one.
I really hope you loved today's episode. And if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business, Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.